Did everybody see what Mel just wrote in the chat? While we're waiting, sound off favorite fairy tales in the chat. Bonus points if you can communicate them solely through emojis. And while you're doing that, let me read my carefully scripted intro. Welcome to the SAW Friday Night Workshop. Doesn't sound like I'm just making this up off the cuff. We're honored the Believer helped us take these over. We hope you have a good time enjoying some creative community and art making. Tonight is Friday Night Fairy Tale Comics with Mel Gillman. SAW is a school, for those of you who don't know us, with loads of online courses you can see in the link I'm about to paste into chat. I hope everybody's typing their favorite fairy tales while I'm talking. We hope that you'll share your work after this little workshop on social media with the hashtag Friday Night Comics and at Comics Workshop and Tom at Hutch Owen. I'll also paste this into chat in just a moment. You can also join hundreds of people sharing their work at our free members site, which is a Facebook alternative on the Mighty Network. And you can find video archives of these workshops on also on SAW Comics. We're a 501c-3 nonprofit, and we thrive on your support and donations. You can support these free workshops, plus the many, many ways in which we strive to meet our mission of training and supporting graphic novelists on Patreon or PayPal. And I'm about to paste everything I just said into chat too. Is it going through? Boo, 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 boo. It doesn't want to paste in, so while I'm figuring out that little technical dilemma, I will hand it off to Mel. Hi, Mel.
Hello. Thank you all for having me. I'm excited to get to talk about this topic with y'all. So welcome everyone. How this is going to work is I have a short little talk that I'm going to give talking about writing fairy tale comics. And yes, thank you for the shout out for the alligator earrings. And then after I've done my talking bit, we're going to go into an in-class exercise where I'm going to walk you through writing and drawing an original fairy tale. Just to like preface that up front, this is not so much a class about like adapting existing folklore into comics form, though that is of course a very fun thing to do. What we're going to be talking about today is more about taking the storytelling style and narrative structure of fairy tales and writing original fiction with them. So I have a short slideshow that I'm going to screen share and talk us through. One other thing that I should say, just as a warning off the bat, is that I am out here in Gainesville as a artist in residence right now. The place where I am staying right now occasionally has slightly iffy internet. So if the internet cuts out on me, I will be back momentarily. I've signed in with my phone on my cellular data too, so it'll just take me a second to transition over there. Hopefully that won't happen. Fingers crossed to the Wi-Fi gods, the great and terrible Wi-Fi gods, that everything's going to run smoothly tonight. But let me go ahead and screen share here. Okay. All right, so you should all be seeing my screen now. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the process of writing fables, writing fairy tale comics, and the kind of narrative structures that go into this style of storytelling and how we can adapt that for our own purposes as storytellers. Just to like give some preference to like, why am I teaching this class? So writing original short fairy tale comics is something that I am relatively well known for at this point. It is something that I do every year, specifically for 24-hour Comics Day. If anyone is familiar with, my Twitter, etc., then you've probably seen me do long Twitter threads every year where I tell an original fairy tale as a comic, sort of as a like one day only mini updating web comic. And I do have a book collection of these short original fairy tale comics, which is going to be coming out this September from Random House Graphic. Other Ever Afters is the name of the book collection, and I'm very excited that this will be out in the world and available for people to read this fall, coming up very soon. But let's dive into this topic more broadly here. So again, first off, just as a disclaimer, the thing that I'm not talking about tonight is I'm not necessarily talking about stuff like this, like taking a existing folk tale or fairy tale and adapting it into a comic, though this is certainly a wonderful thing to do. And if you're interested in doing this, I obviously encourage you to have fun with it. But we're going to be talking about original stories that mimic the style of a classic fairy tale. The other thing that I should say as a disclaimer up front is that the stuff that I'm going to be talking about today is going to be folklore traditions that are kind of rooted in the Western European style of fairy tales and fables. Obviously, across the world, across all communities and cultures on the planet, there are tons of different folklore and fairy tale narrative styles that exist, but the kind of stuff that I'm going to be talking about tonight is rooted a bit more in Western European styles specifically. And for folks who have grown up in Western Europe or in the United States, this is most often the style of fairy tales and folklore that we have been most surrounded with in our daily lives. So let's jump into this a little bit. One thing that I want to say first off is that the interesting thing about fables and fairy tales is that these are arguably going to be our oldest and our longest lived form of storytelling. These are the stories that have lasted the longest in our overall, historical time period. These are the stories that tend to be the longest lived, that tend to reach the most generations of readers and audiences over time. Also, fables, when we're thinking about their narrative structure, it's important to remember that fables are kind of necessarily rooted in oral storytelling. This is a form of storytelling which began as an oral tradition where, we would be hanging out around a campfire and telling each other stories late at night. And even in written forms or in drawn forms, as is the case with comics, we still have a little bit of a lineage that comes from oral storytelling, and finding ways to incorporate that style of oral storytelling into our works can be a useful thing for us as even modern day cartoonists. When you talk to researchers and neuroscientists who study storytelling, and there are actually quite a few people who are doing just that, it's a really fascinating field of research. One thing that they often say about storytelling is that in its earliest form, the purpose of storytelling was probably information sharing. There's a thing about human brains where we are kind of wired to remember narratives. When information is presented to us in the form of a narrative, we tend to absorb it and recall it much better than information which is presented to us in other forms. So our brains in many ways are wired for storytelling, and this is arguably one of our earliest forms of storytelling, fables and folklore. To give you an example of this, so as people who follow me online know, I am a forager. I know lots of obscure facts about, poisonous or edible plants. So one thing that I could tell you as a fact right now would be, okay, if you live in the eastern United States, and if you're walking around in the woods and you happen to see a plant which has these beautiful bright magenta stems and then these really glossy dark bluish black berries on it, don't eat those. They're very poisonous. The berries specifically, don't eat these berries. They're very poisonous. These are called pokeberries. I could tell you that information in a straightforward way, but if I want you to be able to remember that information information so that it becomes useful for you when you are out in the woods and hungry looking for something to snack on, then you're going to remember it better if I tell it to you in the form of a story. So let's, instead of me just giving you this information, let's add in a character. Let's say my good friend Frank over here, one day he was wandering through the woods and he was feeling kind of hungry, and he stumbled upon this bush that had these beautiful magenta stems and glossy dark blue berries on them. And my hungry friend Frank said, "Oh my gosh, I'm in business. I can eat these berries and that will satiate my hunger, and this is going to be great." So of course he ate this fruit here, and as a result of this action, he ended up as an exhibit in the Natural History Museum. Poor Frank here. So this is the same basic information, but I presented it to you in the form of a narrative as opposed to the form of a straightforward piece of facts. And as a species, this is probably what our earliest stories tended to look like. Not the most exciting fiction in the world, but it served an important purpose. When we tell each other stories about the lived experience of other people and oftentimes the mistakes that other humans have made, we are able to transmit that information to other people, which is important because we don't want to live in a world where every single person has to go out into the woods and try berries themselves on purpose to firsthand discover which ones are poisonous or not. We want a way to be able to share information with each other in a memorable form so that it becomes useful for people in the real world. So this is the purpose of narrative storytelling, and this is why our brains are so wired for it. It allows us to learn from other people's experiences and not have to try everything out firsthand and gain firsthand experience for every little piece of knowledge, which is going to be useful and practical for us in our daily lives. It is good that our brains are wired in this way. So over time, obviously, our societies became larger and arguably more complicated than our Paleolithic ancestors. And this form of storytelling, these, like Frank went out into the woods and ate some berries and turned out that they were poisonous and he died, that type of story, it evolved into cautionary fables. We're probably all familiar with cautionary fables, but these are kind of the moral outgrowth of those earlier forms of stories. These have a similar content. They're still aiming to impart important lessons into our listeners or our readers so that they don't have to try everything out with firsthand experience. But, in a larger and maybe more complicated society, these tend to take on moral components, oftentimes more so than practical, like here's what fruit is poisonous and here is what is not. So the type of information that we are sharing with each other is different, but the relative structure of the story tends to stay pretty similar. Cautionary tales, when we think about them, they oftentimes have a pretty standard structure to them. Usually what's going to happen, and we can use Little Red Riding Hood as a classic example of this, is, at the beginning of the story, our protagonist is going to be warned to not do something. For instance, don't talk to strangers in the woods, don't stray from the path. And then, of course, the protagonist is going to do exactly that. They're going to do the exact thing that they were told not to do. And because they did that thing that they were told not to do, there are consequences. And this is oftentimes what a cautionary tale is going to be structured as. And we can kind of understand why we have these types of stories. For instance, it makes sense that as parents, as adults in a community, we would want children, especially, to, for instance, be a little bit wary about going off the path in the woods or talking to strangers in the woods. It makes sense that we would want children to be at least a little bit afraid of those things because they're not going to make as many mistakes, as many potentially dangerous mistakes, if they have a little bit of that fear in them. So we tell stories which involve oftentimes mythical creatures, monsters, monsters or beasts in the woods, but they still have the same effect of encouraging the kind of behavior in our listeners that we want them to, go out and do in the real world. These cautionary tales are about ways that we can teach lessons, and oftentimes to children, but not always to children. Certainly, adults can be the audience for cautionary tales as well. Cautionary tales are also a really good example of another important thing when we're talking about fables and folklore, which is that they function as elaborate metaphors. These are allegories. These are not necessarily meant to be interpreted in the most direct and literal way. For instance, the story of the three little pigs here. This is not a story where we want the take-home lesson from this to be like, literally don't build a house out of straw, though that is obviously important. Obviously, this is a story which is more about, the dangers of cutting corners, where the things that you are cutting corners on can come back to bite you in times of trouble or stress or violence, etc. So it pays to be diligent and do the work up front so that you are safer in the long run. That is what the allegorical content of this story is about. It's not really a story about houses made of straw or houses made of sticks. And we understand that because we understand these stories as metaphors. Another interesting thing too with cautionary tales is that they tend to, because they're all about sharing information and sharing moral lessons, especially to children or other similar audiences, they tend to reflect the moral priorities of the society that tells them, and they also tend to change over time. The same story can be tweaked and adjusted over the course of centuries or decades to better reflect the moral priorities of the society where this story is being told. And we see this happen all the time. To give a good example of this, many different cultures have some form of a Beauty and the Beast type story, something about a young woman who is kind of put into an arranged marriage with a monstrous figure of some sort. And if you think about these stories back in time periods where arranged marriage would have been a more common predicament for young women to find themselves in, then these stories are really about arranged marriage in many ways. These are stories about, if you are, put into a position where you have to be married off to a stranger and you're not attracted to that stranger in the slightest, then here's a fable which is going to tell you like, hey, it's okay. Over time, if you are, diligent and good, you'll be able to kind of find the redeeming qualities in this person who you are married to, and your life is not ruined forever because you are in this position. But in the year 2022, where arranged marriages are, obviously they still happen occasionally, but this is not necessarily a norm in the US, etc. These Beauty and the Beast stories still survive, but they take on a slightly different moral bent. They're going to be more stories about how you shouldn't judge people by appearances, or someone who seems kind of ugly or unlovable on the surface. Maybe they're going to be capable of growth or change. Maybe they're going to have secret, hidden, redeeming qualities. So this is the same structural story here, but it is being used for a different allegorical purpose because the society around it has changed. One interesting thing about myths too is that they have that inherent flexibility to them. They have the ability to be rewritten and tweaked and adjusted on an allegorical level to be reinterpreted by subsequent generations. And this is one of the reasons why these stories last so long, because they're flexible in nature. They're there to be interpreted and reinterpreted and changed to better suit the needs of the current society or culture which is telling them. And this allows them to be much longer lived than many other types of storytelling. So let's transition. Now that I've talked a bit about, the history, the structure of fairy tales, let's talk a bit about how do you actually go into writing one of these. So a simple story structure that is oftentimes going to be used in the, if you are writing a fable, is it's going to boil down to a handful of questions here. First off, obviously, we need to know, who is your character? Who are you writing about in this story? Who is this story about? And then usually your character is going to be motivated by something that they want. There is something that they desire or they are going after at the beginning of the story, and that desire, that want, is going to be the thing that propels them into this narrative. And then, of course, the story has to answer the question, well, are they going to get it? Are they going to get that thing that they wanted to get? And if they succeed, are there consequences for that? Or if they don't succeed, what are the consequences of that? What happens when they get what they want, or if they never get what they want? What spirals out from that moment in the story? To give you an example, how this plays out in a story that we're probably all familiar with, let's think about this in terms of the story of King Midas. So if we're telling the story of King Midas to someone who has never heard of this guy before, then we're going to start with the character of King Midas. We're going to explain a little bit about him. And most importantly, we are going to communicate, what does King Midas want? And obviously, in this case, King Midas wants gold. And what is King Midas going to do in order to get that thing that he wants? In this case, he is going to make a terrible wish to be able to turn everything that he touches into gold. So yes, he succeeds at getting the thing that he wants, and there are consequences in this case, killing everyone and everything that he loves, including himself in most versions of this story. A very bleak ending here for our guy. Another way that we can approach this sense of storytelling structure here is we can think about the difference between a character want and a character need. And if you've ever been through a creative writing class before, you've probably heard professors talk about this before. But many characters are going to have both of these, and most of these characters, they will be aware of the wants. They're aware of the thing that they want, but they're not necessarily aware of the thing that they need. So in the case of King Midas, the thing that he wants, obviously, is endless wealth, but the thing that King Midas needs as a character is to learn to value things other than endless wealth. He needs to readjust his priorities a little bit, and we as the readers understand that, we as the listeners understand that, but King Midas himself does not understand that until it is too late for him in most versions of this story. Structurally, that want that the character has is going to be the thing that motivates them to act in the story. Because they have this desire, this craving for something, that is going to make them do things, that is going to make them put the actions of the plot into motion. They're going to start making changes, start going after the thing that they want. That is going to get the story rolling. And the need, on the other hand, is the thing that's going to create consequences for them. So King Midas, in this case, he has this inherent character flaw that he is not aware of, though the listeners are aware of it. And because he has this character flaw, because he has this lack of insight into himself, this is going to create some consequences for him as he goes after that thing that he wants. So this is a fairly simple way to kind of understand how this plays out in most fables, etc. Also, interestingly, if we're thinking about moralistic fairy tales, then the need of that character is oftentimes basically the exact same thing as the story's moral. So in the case of King Midas, he needs to not be so greedy. He needs to value things other than endless wealth. And thus the moral of the story, the allegorical content, if you will, is don't be so greedy. That is the take-home lesson for us audience members, watching this go down with popcorn in the background. But it's also worth pointing out, as we're all aware, especially if we have read a lot of children's literature before, heavy-handed morals are also very easy to veer into, and they kind of tend to flatten your fable narrative. I think especially people fall into this trap a bit when we're writing for children, because a lot of writers for children kind of underestimate the intelligence of children when they're writing these stories. So they tend to write stories which are very much so like, here are some characters who lied and they found out that lying is bad. And I'm not saying that there's never any place for stories like that, but they can tend to feel fairly flat, and oftentimes kids especially are able to see right through them. They're over it before even we as adults are usually. Another interesting structure that I want to throw out there before we get into our exercise for the night is there's something in fairy tales that is called the rule of three. And once you find out what this is, you're going to start seeing it all over the place. The basic idea here is that fairy tales tend to structure themselves very often around the number three. We see lots of examples of this. And when we're thinking about the number three as it interacts in fairy tales, it also has a specific pattern to it. It's not just any random three characters or three objects, etc. It's generally two failures followed by one success. So think about Goldilocks for a second. We've got three bears, and when Goldilocks is going through the house, trying out all the beds, as we all recall, she finds, one bed which is too soft, one bed which is too hard, two failures, and then one bed which is just right, one success. So two fails, then one success. That is the pattern that we're following here in most cases. Similarly, the Three Little Pigs also follows this structure. We've got two houses that fail, the straw house and the stick house, and then one house that succeeds, the brick house. Even something like Rumpelstiltskin is going to have this, where we've got three wishes, and the first two, three guesses as to Rumpelstiltskin's name. The first two guesses are failures. The third guess is a success. So this brings us to an important question, though, like, why the number three? Of all the numbers in the universe, why do we keep boiling things down to the number three? What is the point of this? And there's all sorts of goofy conspiracy theories about this, but I'm going to go into what I tend to think is the reason for this. And obviously we cannot go back in time and interview our Paleolithic ancestors or anything and be like, why the number three? Why do you all care so much about the number three? But here's what I tend to think about this. One is, on a basic level, if you think about this as a storyteller, how many bears do we have to listen to here? Like, how much time do we have sitting around our campfire to hear about how many different bears inside this house? Four is maybe too many bears. What would a four bear story look like? That would be like, okay, one bed was too soft, one bed was too hard, one bed had like a weird plaid duvet on it that seemed kind of tacky, and then the fourth bed, that was the perfect one right there. It's just a little bit too much. And two bears, on the other hand, is a little bit too little. It doesn't feel substantial enough if Goldilocks goes into the house and, tries one bed and it's too soft and then immediately finds a perfect bed sitting right next to it. So four is too many, but two is too few. And this makes sense when we think about this as an oral storytelling tradition. How many examples do we have to go through while we're sitting around a campfire? How many things do we have to remember as a storyteller when we're trying to recite these stories to our audience? Three is a kind of a sweet spot in terms of numbers of items that we can go through in a list in a story. There are other reasons too. One theory that I hear pretty often from people is that three is also the smallest number that we can use to establish a pattern. So again, that goes back to that two failures, one success pattern. Three is the smallest number that we can use to kind of establish a pattern like that. And that pattern feels very satisfying to us as audience members. We get the general allegorical gist of this when we're given those three items, and we can see two things that failed and then finally land on the one thing that succeeded. Another thing which is important to remember when we're thinking about writing original fairy tales is that as writers, as people who are using language to communicate these stories, I want you to remember that in your stories, even if you're drawing a comic, something which people are going to read and oftentimes read silently, one of your tasks is to evoke the spoken word, because the spoken word is the root of this form of storytelling. And if you can find a way to evoke the spoken word in the stories that you are telling, then they're going to feel more in line with a fable. They're going to feel more of a type with the type of rich folklore traditions that you're trying to tap into, even in your original work. So one of the ways that I tend to think about this is that I think that fable comics are actually a form of poetry comics. And it's hard to give practical tips for how you accomplish this as a storyteller, but I will say, when you get it right, you can hear it when you read it out loud. So I'm going to read aloud this Emily Carroll page for you so you can kind of hear what I'm talking about when I'm talking about evoking that oral storytelling style. You can hear it when it's spoken aloud. There once was a young girl who lived at the edge of a deep, dense forest. Before she left for her mother's house, her father told her, "Don't linger in the woods, travel swift and safe. There are wolves circling in the dark." Yes, Papa. You can hear it when it's done well, and it's something where, as a writer, what I want to encourage you to do is to literally read your comics aloud to yourself. Practice this and see if you can hear that oral storytelling rhythm, and see if you can incorporate that poetic meter into the way that you are writing your story. Here's another page that I'll read aloud, just as an example here. "I loved her from the moment I saw her. Her long black hair, her rosy lips, and her beautiful big gray eyes. I've kept her safe ever since, and I'm not stopping now." You can hear it when it's done well, and it's something that the best practical way you can practice this is to get in the habit of reading your own work aloud to yourself. How does it sound, and what tone are you using as a verbal storyteller, just in the same way as if we were all sitting around a campfire right now? All right, so without any further ado, I want to spend the rest of our time together doing an in-class exercise. So please go ahead and gather some materials, whatever you would like to do some writing, do some drawing on. You do not need anything fancy right now. Any scrap paper, any pencils or pens that you have lying around are going to be totally fine. I'm just going to be doing this myself on like cheap computer paper. You do not need fancy art supplies tonight. Also, if you're a person who likes to work digitally and you want to do this on a tablet, an iPad, anything like that, that is also completely fine. Whatever you have available, we're going to go ahead and use that. So this exercise is going to have a written component and also a drawn component. So we're going to be doing a little bit of both here. Here's what I want us to start with. As I was saying earlier, folk tales, fairy tales, they all have to start with a character. Who is our story going to be about? So what I would like each one of you to do individually right now is choose one of these three animals. It can be whichever one appeals to you right now, a frog, a mouse, or a bird. And this is going to be the main character of your original folk tale that you are going to be writing here. You also do not have to pick, this specific frog wearing that like cute little bow tie and shorts. Just like any frog is fine. We're just thinking about animal types right now. So everybody take a second, pick one of these animals. This is what you're going to be telling a story about. Next step, I'm going to give us just a minute or so. And what I want you to do is to grab a pen, grab a pencil, grab something to write with, and I want you to make a list of everything that this animal could possibly want. And again, think of this in a folktale context. These do not have to be literal wants here. These can be weird allegorical wants. Oftentimes the weirder the better. Also, don't worry if not all your ideas are good. That is the point of brainstorming. If you get stuck, by the way, a recommendation that I always give to folks when they're brainstorming is, if at any point you feel like you're hitting a wall and you can't come up with anything, stop trying to come up with good ideas and instead try to come up with bad ideas. What is the worst possible thing that this frog or this mouse or this bird could possibly want? Start writing some of those down until you feel the dam break loose in your brain a little bit. So I am going to give you 1 minute to do this. Just keep your pencil moving, write down as many possible wants as you can come up with. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, wherever you're at, go ahead and put your pens down for a second. Hopefully you all had a list of a handful of items here. So we're going to move on to step 2 of our storytelling process here. With that list of items that this animal could possibly want, I want you to choose one favorite from that list, whatever appeals to you right off the bat. Don't worry, don't worry about overthinking this at this point. Just pick whatever appeals to you from that list that you generated. And our next step is going to be another brainstorming step. What I want you to do now is I want you to spend a minute listing all the different possible ways that they could try to get that thing that they want. And again, remember that these are fairy tales. These do not have to be realistic. They do not have to be rational. Weird ideas are totally fine. The kind of things that you would find in a folktale are totally fine here. And the goal here, again, as always with brainstorming, is just to keep your pen moving as much as possible for the next minute. Just write down as many possible ideas as you can come up with, good, bad, and ugly. And anytime that you get stuck, stop trying to come up with good ideas, try coming up with bad ideas instead. All right, I'm going to give you another minute for this item right here. Go ahead and start writing.
We're supposed to write what specifically?
List the ways that this animal could try to get what they want based off of that list that you wrote earlier. So pick one item that they might want and then list the ways they could try to get what they want.
Would it be them specifically having to get it, or could other people achieve it for them?
Them specifically, though they can get help from others.
Does it have to be a physical object, or could it be sort of a goal?
Goals are fine. All right, that's a minute. So go ahead and put your pens down again, wherever you're at. So hopefully you've got a list of possible ways that this animal could try to get that thing that they want, whatever it is. And we're gonna move on to our next step here. So finally, what I want us to do is I want to turn these ideas into a comic. What I would like you to do is to take your list and then choose 3 of the ways that you wrote down, your favorite 3, whatever they are, that your animal could try to get that thing that they want. And I want you to draw this process as a 1-page comic. Worth noting, by the way, since time is short here, don't feel like this has to be beautiful, polished, amazing artwork here. Loose artwork, sketchy artwork, stick figures, all of that is completely and totally fine. You are not making something which is, going to be immediately perfect and flawless. This is about getting some ideas down on paper in a loose and sketchy way. as we were talking about with the rule of three earlier in fable structure, the first two attempts that this animal makes to get that thing that they want, those should be failures. That last attempt, though, I will leave it up to you. You can decide, does this animal finally get that thing that they want, or do they never get that thing that they want? And in either case, what are the consequences of that? That's the most important question here. What are the consequences when they finally do or don't get that thing that they want after trying three ways to do so? All right, and let's see, we are at about 7:40 now, so I am going to give us the last 20-ish minutes to work on these together. And then after that, hopefully we will be able to have some time if folks want to share their comics with each other. Let me pause really quick here, just so I can see, do folks have questions about this process before I set you loose and we start drawing these together?
I see Andrew's hand is raised. Did you have a question, Andrew?
I apologize. I hit a button, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Kathy is asking, does it have to have separate frames?
I would encourage you to have separate panels in your comic. But obviously, if you want to get experimental or want to draw panelist comics, then I will be excited to see that too. It's comics. At the end of the day, there's no rules here. So do what feels comfortable. And a recommended number of panels, I saw that. That is going to be up to you. However many panels you feel like you need to tell this story here. All right, let's go ahead and get drawing then. I'm excited to see these.
Can I ask one teensy favor? Can you put those animal pictures back up on the screen share?
Yes, I will go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
Mel, do you want people to share things anywhere? People are asking in the chat.
Yes, and this would be a good question for the believer folks, because I'm not sure what our process has been like for past workshops. Do we have a way that we tend to like to have folks share what they've been working on?
Yeah, usually we just ask people to raise their hand, and then I'll spotlight them and they can share.
All
So if you'd
right.
like to share, I believe it's under reactions, and raise hand.
Michael, can you put the links, the social media tags? Do you have those for sharing on Instagram and stuff?
Yeah, I'll post that at the end. Right now, we're just gonna share here. Yeah. Okay, cool. I see Jeannie. But you're muted, Jeannie.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Can you hear me, see me okay?
I have Jeannie M. Spotlighted? Okay.
Oh, sorry. I
That's
thought you
okay.
said
Our
Janine.
names are really close, Janine.
Right on. Sorry.
Yay. Great name. Okay, so I chose a chicken that wants to be a stand-up comedian and listed a whole bunch of ways that that they could get to be a stand-up comedian. And then the three panels are first, the chicken is practicing their routine, which is pretty much, anyway. And then videotaping it and sending that first to Lauren Michael, and then to Samantha B. And then finally, Big Bird responds and says you're on. Yay, chickens. Thank you so much for a wonderful fairy tale run through.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jeannie. How about Vernon?
Hey, thank you for letting me share. I also picked a bird, and I decided that what the bird wants is silence, and what the bird needs is vengeance. So in the first it's a weird little half page, the bird is singing, but there's a bunch of noise coming from outside, and it's a guy doing a jackhammer. And so the bird tries to sing louder than the jackhammer, but it doesn't stop the guy, so he flies away, and then he gets his own jackhammer, but he's a tiny bird, so he can't jackhammer quite as loud as the guy. So then he poops on the guy, and the guy says, "Oh no, gotta get cleaned up." And finally the bird has silence, and I didn't know exactly how to write the moral, so I just left a blank page. And I think the moral is poop on your enemies.
Cool, thanks for sharing that. Janine?
Right on. I'm Janine. I'm in Massachusetts. My character was a mouse, and he wants a drum kit. So he goes to try to buy it at the instrument shop, but the bird who owns the shop says, "No, you don't have enough money." So then he tries to make his own kit in his garage, and he has a fork and a spoon as drumsticks, and he's all by himself. And then and that's like a dinner plate hanging over there. And then he joins a band, and then that's how he gets his drum kit.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Lori? You're muted. Thank you.
I did a bird as well. Okay, so my character desires, my bird wants human shoes or people shoes. So once upon a time, he dreams of human shoes. Then he goes to a park where there's a child with a doll, and tries to take the shoe from the child, but that didn't work out because got the child really upset. So then he goes to a stable because he knows horses wear shoes, but that didn't quite work out either. And then he goes to a cobbler and asks the cobbler if he could make some shoes just for him. And he's happy that he got shoes just for his feet.
That's awesome. Michelle?
All right, mine is about an evil snake. I have it as my background. It's a contemporary fable. It's a snake who wanted all the power. So first he tried to get the water, tried to capture the power of water, and he nearly drowned. And then he tried to capture the power of the wind, and he nearly flew into space. It's down here. And then finally he tried to capture fire, and he was burnt to a crisp, and the babushkas ate him up with their borscht. The end.
Libby, I need you to turn your camera. Oh, great. And you're muted.
Yes, I was laughing too hard to do anything. So I also have a bird, but it's because of the sad robins arriving in the snow here. So the bird wants a worm. The bird does work with an ice auger. That doesn't go so well. It tries a snow plow. And then it sees spaghetti inside on the counter, and it tries some spaghetti and realizes that's not too bad.
Awesome. Audrey?
we go. Hi. Okay, so I did a mouse, and the mouse wants to become friends with the cat. So the mouse is first going to try some love potion, pours it in the water dish, and then Kitty just throws it up. And then the mouse tries an ad in the newspaper, says, I'd like a date. I like cheese and long walks. But the owner of the cat uses the newspaper for a liner in the kitty box. And finally, finally the mouse just says, let's go out. And so there they are. They're out having beer and pizza. And the moral is always ask, always come right out and ask what you want.
Nice, thank you. Jan Spence.
Okay, so mine is the to be continued because I got really involved with mine. But long story short, I'll show it in 1 second. It was a little baby bird who wanted to become friends with the cat in the house below. And he went through, he was going to go through getting his siblings to lower him down on a string and not work. And then he was going to try to fall out of the tree, but got a little scared. And finally, he was going to come up with a Rube Goldberg machine. But that was a little bit complicated. So this is, once there was a young bird who lived in a nest with their brothers and sisters. The bird's name was Robin. He had a lot of curiosity about the world. His brother is saying, Mama, I'm hungry. The other one is saying, Papa, I'm sleepy. And Robin's saying, what is that? And he's looking down. I don't know if you can see this. There we go. He's looking down at the house below. Robin often watched the world outside his nest and wondered about it. In the place below, he saw a knot bird that seemed to think a lot about the world too. And the knot bird sometimes seemed to think to see him too. And while his brothers and sisters slept, Robin often stayed awake, wondering if he'd ever get to meet the knot bird. Sometimes he imagined a life where he and the knot bird were friends and seeing the world together. And so that's the final count.
Beautiful. I see ND.
So I'm not very good at fairy tales. So, I mean, what's on my mind is the Ukraine thing. So kind of went that direction. Started out with a moral, but didn't really have one at the end. So a bunch of explosions and bombs, and bird gets startled. It's up in a tree here, not very clear. Gets startled and says, holy shit, gotta get out of here. And leaves, flies away. And tries to warn everybody else by saying, why aren't you leaving? Why aren't you just flying away? So the moral isn't really not terribly clear, but it's also that the bird doesn't quite understand how things work or why. And this sort of comes from Zelensky saying, why didn't NATO close the airspace for Ukraine? And it's sort of mulling that over. So.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Catherine?
Okay, I did a bird, and the bird is looking for God. So he looks under a rock and wonders, is God there? And then he looks in the water and says, is God there? And then flies back to his nest and sees his little baby bird, and they love each other. The end.
Hey. I see Andrew.
Hey there. Okay, so I took the frog. So let's see. All right. So it starts off. he needs a job, so he does call center frog, and he calls people up, but all he can say is ribbit. They go, what? He says ribbit. So the result of that is fired frog. So then he decides he's going to be a singer, so he's singing frog, and it says one night only frog, and he starts going ribbit, ribbit, and people start yelling boo, boo, and they yell, there ought to be a law. So fired frog again, get out. And then finally, frog acts top exterminator in the land. So the moral is persistence and never give up, and he has his own business now.
Carrie Buchwald.
Hey, okay. Oops. There we go. Okay, so I also did the frog. Let's see if we can't get that into focus here. Okay, so here's the conflict. He is a frog and he's watching his friends get eaten by the big stork, like we saw in Mel's presentation. So he thinks if I'm invisible, the bird's going to be confused and he won't find me. So how's he going to do that? So he goes to the library and he decides to check out a book on quantum mechanics. He figures if he can increase his probability of not being where the stork is, he'll survive. But look at all these formulas. It's too hard for him to figure out. So he's going to go to the experts. He's going to go to Chernobyl and get radioactive, and that's what's going to make him invisible. But the problem is he went there and he turned out even more green. So then finally, he decided to go to theological roots and he sold his body to the devil and kept his soul, and he lived happily ever after uneaten. There he is down here.
Whoa. Martha?
Okay. So this is called The Tale of a Tale. There once was a mousy mouse with a ratty tail. He was ashamed of his tail. Yuck. He tried pasting cotton balls on it, but they fell off. He tried curling it, but it wouldn't stay curled. So he underwent a radical tailectomy and he lived happily ever after.
Mel, how are we doing on time for you? Do we have time to keep going and more sharing?
Fine if we want to keep going so folks can get a chance to share. But obviously, if people need to leave, don't worry about it. You can check out if you need to.
All right, I just wanted to check with you. How about Rebecca Levin?
I chose the bird. I did mine. The bird wants to be human. I don't know if this is, hope this works. Yeah, the bird wants to be human.
Can
So
you bring
the
a
first,
little closer to the camera.
okay. Yeah, bird wants to be human. So first they try to mimic humans by just putting on a hat, and the people just laugh because it's a bird in a hat. Then he goes to a magician to try to like be turned human, and the magician says no. And then he's feeling sad and he's just chilling, being depressed. And this person walks up to him and says like, "Oh, what a beautiful bird." He's like, "But I'm not human, so I can't be beautiful." And the person says, "Well, you know, there's more than one way to be beautiful, and you don't have to be human to be beautiful." So he lives happily ever after and never tries to change himself again. Yeah.
Nice. Michael Wu?
Hello, these are concepts for something called Little Blue Riding Hood. I'm trying to figure out how to draw a Russian wolf that looks like Vladimir Putin and is wearing a grandma hat. And And so this is going to show scenes like this with the question, Grandma, what big tanks you have, the better to protect you with. And Grandma, what big training exercises your army is operating, the better to serve you with. Grandma, what sharp teeth you have. Little girl, a wolf gets hungry now and then. And that's it.
Wow.
So I'll turn it into a real comic, but at least these are some concepts.
Cool. Namita, am I saying your name right?
I did a frog too. I don't know if you can see it. So it starts off with the frog being lonely on his little lotus far away from the city, and then he goes hopping along to a city, and he really, really just wants to be held. And so there he sees a little baby being held by a doting mom with a little pacifier in their mouth. And so he goes on a little quest to get the pacifier and like try to be cute, and tries to snap the pacifier with the tongue, and then tries to make noise and get the shock the baby into releasing it, and then like switches it off with like a cherry, and then gets kind of hit by the parent, and then a little girl finds the frog and holds him because he failed and was looking sad. That was me.
Beautiful. Ashish?
Hi, thanks. I'll try to see if I can focus. So my fairy tale is called Today. When I woke up, it's my morning where I am. I was in the routine cocoon, and I really wanted to come to this class, but I had to get past my routine activities to make time. And I tried hard, I did, but as soon as I was out of the routine, I was encountered by this major task which had to be accomplished. So my need is to accomplish the task. My want is to reach the workshop. And finally, I'm past all that. I'm at the Zoom screen and I jump on 15 minutes late. Thank you.
Cool. Excel. Disappeared. Umi?
Hi, do you hear me?
Yeah.
So there's a crow who really loves glitter stuff. And oops. And she tries to take a bottle cap from a person who's drinking, and she makes it to her own hat. She wants more glitter stuff, so she approaches the cat and say like, hey, can I dig your eyes out? Of course, the cat says no. And she wanted more and more glitter stuff. So she goes to the river at night, even when other crows are sleeping, and tries to catch the moonbeam in the river, and eventually loses her sweet bottle cap hat. She was so tired by the other day, the next day. And so she lands on something kind of glittery, and I'm so tired. And then ended up, this was an old person, and a bold old person. And then, so she's like, oh, well, the old person says like, oh, well, I got a new hat. It's warmer. And yeah, in return, the crow gets a bottle cap as a new hat. Yeah.
Awesome. Jackie?
So I don't know how well you'll be able to see this. I picked the mouse, and the mouse is like, oh man, I hate being all Porky Pig without any pants. I wish I had some pants. It's fall. I know I can get some so a pumpkin pants would be the bomb. I know, I'll steal a pumpkin. Look, there's one right now. And then there's me putting out a pumpkin, tra-la-la-la, putting out my pumpkin. Give me that pumpkin. And I'm like, not so fast, little rodent. And I stomp on him. The mouse is like, the shit is up. maybe I can buy one at the farmer's market. And here's Farmer Bob, like, whoa, what can I do for you, my wee friend? Yes, I would like to buy one of your pumpkins. Hey, wait a minute. This is, so he doesn't want, like, he's got his mouse money and the mouse money is no good. And so he gets kicked out again. And this, this sucked. I wish I had some pumpkin pants. Oh boy, a jack-o'-lantern. And he finally gets it. Behold my pumpkin pants. Oh, yuck. It's cold and squishy in here and I don't have a bladder, so now my pumpkin's full of piss. Fuck that. I'm way better off without any pants. So that's the moral of the story is, like, you didn't really need the pants. Just not functional if you're a mouse with no bladder and nowhere to put your tail. So that's my fairy tale. Thank you.
Nice. Bridget?
Hi,
I think you remuted yourself.
I'm gonna try to share the screen. Oh, disabled screen sharing, never mind.
Hang on.
Okay.
I can change that.
Oh, thank you.
It's changed.
All right, cool. All right, can everybody see it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I picked a mouse. I once was a lonely, hungry mouse. I'm lonely, I'm hungry. So I looked for help. The vole in the hole said, get lost, I'm no charity. And on his search, he found a house. Hello, hello. In the house, there was a mouse. What's it like living in the house? It's safe, but I'm bored and lonely. Our furry friend sat next to the house's barn and began to cry. Is there no place for me? You could join us. Yes, please. We don't have much, but we can share. Finally, a home for me.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tomcat?
Hi, I got a frog. I was at the draw jam last night. Just show this real quick. This is a picture of our friend Pootie saying, who you calling a murdering little B word. But anyway, this is my frog and he wants money. So he starts by wanting to rob a bank and he gets smashed into the doorway by the guy guarding the front door. This is him trying to rob somebody in their car and they run him over. That didn't work out. So what does he do? He tries to hack a bank and he gets rich hacking a bank on the computer. So that's our little 3 attempt scenario there.
Cool. I think Mel is like responding in chat, but the chat is moving so quickly I don't know what she's saying. So we'll just move on.
The frog desk chair. So there's all 6 panels at once.
Cool. Andrew, did you already share? Your hand is still up from before, I think.
I keep screwing that up. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Marianne?
Let's see, how do I do that?
Okay, so my comic is very rough because I spent most of the time on the script. See, where we go. There it is. So up here, see if I can point correctly. Sorry, it's not mirrored for me. My iris, if only I could be blue like you. My mouse wants to have blue fur. She says, Madam B, do you know how the flowers can be so blue? Paint? I don't know. I'm busy. Oh no, I'm pointing the wrong direction. Sorry. But the paint washed off in the rain. I know, says the fairy. Hold your breath. That will turn you blue. The mouse, she tried and tried, but if holding her breath might work, she could not do it long. Exhausted, she looked to the sky, a beautiful cerulean blue. Could she fall up and up to be with the blue? No. And then she's just lying on the hill sighing.
Oh.
Thank you for sharing. Rachel, we have time for just a couple more. And then I put the tags, if you want to share on Instagram, and you can also share on Mighty Network.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and I did a comic about a bird. My bird is a magpie, and the comic is about his quest to make a nest with forbidden materials. The witch's garden is full of treasure and danger. The witch's garden is full of danger, but holds many treasures. Try and he tried to walk through the gate the grate where the water drains from the garden, but the dog caught him. He tried to fly over the dog, but he got his claws stuck in the net. He was so tired, he had to sit and wait so he could escape, and he chose to sit on the witch's hat. And while she was gardening, he saw his chance and stole the twig he wanted from one of her magic trees. And then flapped and flapped away. And she goes, "Hey," she says, "you could have just asked." And as he's flying away, he thinks danger makes the best nest.
Awesome. All right, two more, Chris and then Axel.
So mine's about a frog, and he's sitting on a lily pad, and he wants to be a prince. So then he goes and hangs out in front of a gym where maybe he will meet some women coming out of a Zumba class, but there's just people walking around and he almost gets stepped on. So he decides to sign up for some classes. And
frog legs.
Frog legs. And then he decides to try an app on his phone, and he finds an app called Frogger, and he thinks that'll match him with a princess.
Probably not.
Axel, are you on camera?
Yes.
Close us out. Wait.
Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah, share your screen.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yes. Can you see it?
It looks like it's coming up. I see the words Axel has started screen sharing, but I don't see a picture
Is
yet.
it showing?
Not for me yet, but
If it doesn't work, I could show it from my camera.
I can see there it is. We see it now. Cool. Do you want to walk us through it?
Okay. Story of a little mouse who wanted there's the story of a little mouse who wanted to go rock keeping. So they took a rock and threw it, but it did not work. And then they took another rock and threw it out of anger, but it still did not work. And they grew sad. But then they felt another rock with their tail and thought maybe that could work. And so they threw it with their tail and went as far as they could go. And so like the moral is if at first you don't succeed, then keep doing it.
Okay.
So yeah.
Awesome. Hey, I'm gonna paste those Instagram tags in the chat one more time. I wish we had time to share with everybody, but at least share there or share on Mighty Network. Mel, any closing thoughts?
No, these were all wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing these. Also, oh my gosh, like the amount of like work that you got done in like 20 minutes here is kind of incredible. So thank you so much for this. This was a genuine delight. I love all these stories, and I hope that all of these frogs and all these mice and all these birds get everything that their hearts desire at the end of the day.
Awesome. Should we tag you too on Instagram?
If you want to, up to you, either way.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for a great workshop. Thanks for coming, everybody. Oh, does Susan Marks, are you doing an after party? Do you want to?
I am, and it's posted here. Enter. If anybody wants to drop by.
And it's for people who didn't get a chance to share, they can still share at the after party or decompress or
Everybody can come off mute and say thanks to Mel. Right?
Thank you. This
Thank
was
you.
awesome.
Thank
you.
So much fun.
Love your work.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Thanks, Mel.
everybody.
What's Mel's handle? What's Mel's Insta?
Just search for her name, Mel
Yeah,
Gillman.
Mel
and
Gillman.
It will come up.
There
Yeah,
you
there it is. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.